On March 7, 2025, at exactly 6:05 p.m., 3 rifle shots echoed through a South Carolina prison. 67-year-old Brad Keith Sigmon had just become only the 4th person executed by firing squad in America since 1976. After 23 years on death row, his time was up. But what brutal crime landed him there? What did he choose for his final meal? And what were his last words before facing those rifles? Before we begin, please like this video, share and subscribe to this channel if this case touches you. David and Gladys Lark were simple country folks who lived quiet lives in South Carolina. They had 5 children and were known throughout their community as people who always looked out for others. David had a good heart, and together with Gladys, they kept their family close and strong. Their daughter Rebecca had been dating a man named Brad Keith Sigmon. At first, things seemed normal between them, but as time went on, cracks began to show in their relationship. Friends and family started noticing tension. Arguments became more frequent. The once happy couple was falling apart. Sigmon wasn't handling the relationship problems well. Those close to Rebecca could see something was changing in him. There was an anger building that made people uncomfortable. The way he looked at Rebecca, the way he spoke to her, it all felt different, darker. Rebecca's parents, David and Gladys, watched their daughter's relationship with growing concern. They had always been protective of their children, and something about Sigmon's behavior was setting off alarm bells. But they had no idea just how dangerous the situation was becoming. In their quiet neighborhood, where everyone knew each other and violence was rare, no one could have predicted what was about to happen. The storm was building, and the Lark family was directly in its path. When police arrived at the Lark family home, they found a scene that would haunt investigators for years. David and Gladys Lark were dead. The elderly couple had been brutally murdered in their own home, a place that should have been their safe haven. The crime scene told a story of violence and terror. This wasn't a random break-in gone wrong or a robbery attempt. The evidence pointed to something much more personal and calculated. Someone had specifically targeted this family, and they had done so with deadly intent. Investigators immediately began piecing together what had happened. The positioning of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, the lack of forced entry, everything suggested the killer was someone the victims knew. Someone they had trusted enough to let into their home. As detectives canvassed the neighborhood and interviewed family members, one name kept coming up: Brad Keith Sigmon. Rebecca's boyfriend had been having serious problems with the family. Witnesses reported seeing him in the area. His behavior had been increasingly erratic and threatening. The realization hit investigators hard. This wasn't just a double murder. There was more to the story. Rebecca Barber, the victim's daughter, was missing. Had she been taken? Was she hurt? Or worse, was she dead too? A massive manhunt began immediately. Police issued alerts across multiple states. They knew they were looking for an armed and extremely dangerous man who had already killed twice and might not be finished. Brad Sigmon and Rebecca Barber's relationship had been crumbling for months. What started as romance had turned toxic. Sigmon couldn't accept that things were over. He became obsessed with the idea of taking Rebecca away from her family and starting fresh somewhere else. His plan was simple but deadly. He would force her to come with him to North Carolina, whether she wanted to or not. On that fateful day, Sigmon arrived at the Lark family home with murder on his mind. David and Gladys Lark had no idea what was coming. They probably thought this was just another visit from their daughter's boyfriend. Maybe they hoped he was there to work things out peacefully. But Sigmon had already made his choice. He killed both David and Gladys Lark in cold blood. The details of their deaths revealed the brutal nature of his attack. These weren't quick, merciful killings. The elderly couple suffered before they died. Sigmon showed no mercy to the people who had welcomed him into their home and treated him like family. With Rebecca's parents dead, Sigmon moved to the next part of his plan. He forced Rebecca into a 2001 Honda Passport at gunpoint. She was terrified, knowing that the man she once loved had just murdered her mother and father. Sigmon's plan was to switch vehicles later and drive his own car up to North Carolina with Rebecca as his prisoner. But Rebecca wasn't going to give up without a fight. As they drove, she saw her chance and took it. She managed to jump out of the moving Honda and ran for her life. Her escape attempt triggered something violent in Sigmon. He couldn't let her get away. She was the only witness to what he had done. Sigmon chased after Rebecca on foot, firing his gun at her as she ran. The shots rang out in the quiet neighborhood, but somehow Rebecca kept running. She dodged between houses and trees, desperate to reach safety. Sigmon continued shooting, determined to silence her forever. Miraculously, Rebecca managed to escape. Despite being shot at multiple times, she survived and made it to help. She was rushed to Greenville Memorial Hospital for treatment. Her injuries were serious, but she was alive. She had survived an encounter with a man who had already killed twice that day. Realizing that his plan had completely fallen apart, Sigmon fled the scene. Rebecca was alive, which meant she could identify him. The police would be looking for him soon. His face would be on every news channel and wanted poster in the state. But Sigmon's escape wouldn't last long. He had left behind too much evidence and too many witnesses. The manhunt was already beginning, and investigators had a clear suspect. Rebecca's survival meant that justice would have a chance to catch up with Keith Sigmon. For 11 tense days, police across multiple states searched for Brad Sigmon. He had become one of America's most wanted fugitives. Law enforcement agencies shared his photo and description everywhere. The public was warned that he was armed and extremely dangerous. The manhunt finally ended in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Police found Sigmon and arrested him without incident. He was quickly extradited back to South Carolina to face justice for his crimes. The state immediately announced they would seek the death penalty. A South Carolina grand jury indicted Sigmon on multiple charges: 2 counts of murder, first-degree burglary, kidnapping, and other serious offenses. When his trial began in July 2002, something unexpected happened. Sigmon admitted his guilt to the jury. He confessed to killing David and Gladys Lark. The prosecution painted a horrific picture of the murders. They argued that both victims had endured the most horrific death imaginable. The prosecutor told the jury that based on the brutal nature of the crimes, Sigmon deserved to die. They said he should receive the same mercy he had shown his victims, none at all. Sigmon's defense team tried a different approach. They didn't deny what he had done, but they asked the jury to consider why he did it. They blamed his relationship problems with Rebecca for pushing him over the edge. His lawyers pointed to his good behavior in jail and his struggles with drug addiction as reasons to spare his life. They begged the jury to sentence him to life in prison instead of death. The defense strategy failed completely. On July 20, 2002, after hearing all the evidence, the jury unanimously voted to sentence Brad Sigmon to death for both murders. The judge also gave him an additional 30 years in prison for the burglary charge. Sigmon showed little emotion as his fate was sealed. At 44 years old, he was heading to death row. But his legal battle was far from over. In America's justice system, death penalty cases automatically trigger years of appeals. Sigmon's lawyers would spend the next 2 decades trying to save his life. Brad Sigmon's fight for his life began immediately after his death sentence. His lawyers filed appeal after appeal, hoping to find some legal error that would overturn his conviction or change his sentence to life in prison. In December 2005, the South Carolina Supreme Court rejected his first direct appeal. They upheld both his death sentences and his murder convictions. Sigmon's lawyers tried again in 2013, but the state's highest court rejected that appeal too. They moved to federal court, but in 2018, the U.S. District Court dismissed his case. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected him in 2020. Finally, in January 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case. Sigmon had run out of legal options. But then something unexpected happened. Sigmon was scheduled to die on February 12, 2021, but he received a last-minute stay of execution. The problem wasn't with his case, It was with South Carolina's ability to kill him. The state had run out of lethal injection drugs and couldn't legally carry out executions. South Carolina hadn't executed anyone since 2011. Pharmaceutical companies had stopped selling execution drugs to states, creating a nationwide shortage. For 13 years, South Carolina's death row inmates lived in limbo, unable to be executed but still facing death sentences. State lawmakers decided to solve this problem by bringing back older execution methods. They passed new laws making the electric chair and firing squad legal alternatives when lethal injection drugs weren't available. This gave condemned inmates three choices: lethal injection or firing squad. Sigmon and other death row inmates sued the state, arguing that the electric chair and firing squad were cruel and unusual punishment. They claimed these methods would cause unnecessary pain and suffering. The case dragged through the courts for years. In July 2024, the South Carolina Supreme Court finally ruled. In a 5-judge decision, they said both the electric chair and firing squad were constitutional. The court cleared the way for executions to resume. The 13-year moratorium ended on September 20, 2024, when Freddie Owens became the first person executed in South Carolina since 2011. Richard Moore followed on November 1, 2024. Marion Bowman Jr. was executed on January 31, 2025. Sigmon was next in line and his time was running out. On February 7, 2025, the South Carolina Supreme Court signed Brad Sigmon's death warrant. His execution was set for March 7, 2025. The court gave him until February 21 to make an impossible choice: lethal injection, electric chair, or firing squad. If he refused to choose, they would use the electric chair by default. Sigmon's lawyer described the decision as cruel and barbaric. Each method terrified Sigmon for different reasons. He feared the electric chair might burn and cook him alive. The lethal injection worried him because recent executions in South Carolina had taken longer than expected. Witnesses reported that previous inmates weren't pronounced dead for more than 20 minutes after receiving the drugs. Some had fluid in their lungs, creating a drowning sensation. The firing squad was the most violent option, but Sigmon knew exactly what it would do. His lawyer explained, "He knows what the firing squad is going to do to his body. He knows it's going to break his bones. He knows it's going to pulverize his organs." Despite this knowledge, Sigmon chose the firing squad on February 21. He didn't want to inflict the violent scene on his family and witnesses, but he felt it was his best option. Sigmon's lawyers made final desperate appeals. They argued he had brain damage, mental illness, and childhood trauma that should make him ineligible for execution. They requested delays to review autopsy reports from previous executions. On February 27, they claimed Sigmon was being forced to choose a violent death because he feared an even more torturous death by lethal injection. Every appeal failed. The South Carolina Supreme Court denied his requests on March 4. As a last resort, Sigmon appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but they rejected his case on the afternoon of March 7, just hours before his scheduled execution. Governor Henry McMaster also denied Sigmon's clemency petition. Supporters argued that Sigmon had become a reformed man who was religious and friendly with other inmates. They said he deserved mercy because he was no longer the same person who committed those brutal murders 23 years earlier. For his last meal, Sigmon requested fried chicken from Kentucky Fried Chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and sweet tea. He originally wanted 3 buckets of chicken to share with other inmates, though reports varied on whether this request was granted. On March 7, 2025, at exactly 6:05 p.m., 3 volunteer prison employees fired their rifles at Brad Sigmon. He was strapped to a chair with a hood over his head and a target on his chest. Witnesses saw no warning or countdown before the shots rang out. Journalist Jeffrey Collins described seeing a jagged red spot about the size of a small fist where the bullets hit. Another reporter, Anna Dobin, witnessed a splash of blood and said Sigmon's arms flexed for several seconds after being shot. His lawyer called the execution horrifying and violent, describing how Sigmon's arm tensed and quivered as if he was trying to break free from the restraints. Sigmon was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. In his final statement read by his lawyer, he called for an end to the death penalty, saying Christians should live under New Testament grace and mercy, not Old Testament justice. Brad Sigmon became the fourth person executed by firing squad in America since 1976, and the first in South Carolina history. What do you think about this case? Do you think justice has finally been served or otherwise? Share your thoughts in the comments section, as I would like to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel